Let's talk about courage and hope. The courage to act when faced with challenges, and the hope that such courage creates. This is what Right Livelihood laureates do every day. This interview presents one of the 4 2022 Right Livelihood laureates and their fight for a better future for all. Let them inspire you. Hope is what we create when we take action together.
Welcome to this interview series with the 2022 Right Livelihood laureates. In our 30-minute conversations, we will explore their work and methods and learn more about the motivation behind their commitment. This is How to Mobilize Change, the Courage to Act. It's a great honor to welcome Dickens Kamugisha, Chief Executive Officer of the 2022 Right Livelihood Laureate, Africa Institute for Energy Governance.
Thank you.
Let's start with the discovery of the oil reserves in 2006. Yes. What happened then, and how did it become clear that there was a threat to communities from climate extraction and exploitation?
In 2006, when companies from the West discovered the commercial quantities of oil in Uganda, those reserves were discovered on land where communities live. The other quantities of those reserves were located in our critical biodiversity areas, including our biggest national park called Machon Falls National Park, including one of our shared lakes called Lake Albert, which is shared between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So companies, for them to do the exploration, to continue with activities, they had to displace thousands of communities to be able to secure their land. They had to stop many communities from accessing the lakes for fishing. They had to stop most of the communities from going to some of the forests to collect firewood. So that's when we discovered that actually this resource is going to disrupt the lives of people, affect our critical biodiversity, and we said we need to do something to ensure that those negative dangers actually stop. By the time oil was discovered in 2006, we had started AFIEGO, and when it started, we were at the university. That time in 2002, 2003, and 4, we are university students, and we are facing problems of electricity. We are supposed to have lessons in the evening, and we couldn't have them because no electricity was there. But at that time, they had constructed a new dam of 200 megawatts, and the government had also invested in another dam to renovate it and upgrade it from 60 megawatts to 180 megawatts. So as students, we said, why are we not having lessons in the evening when the government is saying they have invested in electricity generation? So we said, let's do research to understand what are the problems affecting electricity sector. So when oil was discovered in 2006, we had already started research on energy. So we said oil is part of energy. So we continued doing research, expanding the work that we are doing. So basically, AFIEGO was registered in 2005. So when oil was discovered in 2006, we continued expanding our work.
Can you talk some about the decision to turn AFIEGO from a research organization, as it originally was, to getting involved in activism and serving communities directly?
The reason why we actually said we don't need to do a lot of research, we discovered there was a lot of research by government, by the universities, and by other experts who had already investigated many of the problems, including corruption, including weakness in government, in institutions. So we said what we needed was to provide information, use the existing research, take information to the communities. you will know that Uganda, almost 90% of Ugandans live in the villages. Almost over 80%, they don't know how to read English. And all the research that is done in Uganda, most of it is in English. So we said, let's use our education to be able to translate some of the information from English to the languages that are spoken by the communities, that is understood by the communities. So that's why we said we are not going to spend a lot of time in doing research when there is already information that the communities are not benefiting from. Let's organize ourselves. Let's use different strategies, whether they are radios, whether they are newspapers, whether they are physical meetings. We go to those communities, we give them that information. We show them that actually there are a number of things they can do to protect themselves from the negative impacts of what is going on. So that's the reason why we said, let's spend most of our time in the communities to be able to prepare them, to be able to inspire them, to motivate the communities to do and to resist some of the bad things that were taking place. In 2012, it was the first time when we saw over 7,000 people being displaced from 13 villages in order for government now to build a bigger refinery. So after us saying they could not build in the game reserve in 2008, now in 2012 they said they are going to displace communities to build the refinery. And again we said, yes, the law provides that government can displace people, but it has a condition that for you to displace anyone from his or her land, you must first provide fair and adequate compensation. So our view was that you must ensure the laws are followed. And unfortunately, as I said, most of the communities are poor. They have no capacity on their own to challenge companies. These are huge companies, to challenge the government. So for them, without any support from people at least who are educated, they cannot resist. So we mobilize the communities to say, please, you must demand, for respect for your rights. One of the biggest challenges that we've been facing throughout the time we started has been the hostility from government. Because the government in Uganda knows very well that without the support of civil society like AFIEGO, the communities on their own have no chance of organizing themselves and speaking with one voice. So, but we also discovered that, without having the communities as our biggest constituents, the government would not allow us to do anything. So, before the government actually discovered that our messages were strong, that actually we had the capacity to stop certain bad projects, we had already built the constituencies. Those communities that I talked about, which were being affected by the refinery land acquisition, by the land grabbing, the ones that were being stopped from accessing the Lake Albert, the ones that were being stopped from accessing forests to get firewood, they had already discovered that actually we were very useful and they needed to work with us. So we kept on working with them. So I must tell you that it is not easy. We've faced many, many problems. The communities that you also strengthened to start speaking up, they also face the same problems. The government, the police, the military will threaten them, will take them to police cells, will threaten them, will summon them, and the objective is actually to instill maximum fear in those communities to stop speaking.
Can you talk about the decision to go to court against Total Oil and why how that court case came about?
You see, before we filed the case in France, we had already filed a number of cases in Uganda High Court and the Court of Appeal, challenging a number of projects where Total is engaged in and other companies. And unfortunately, in Uganda, it is almost next to impossible to file a case and you expect a decision. Even if you have the best evidence, you will look at the judgment given by court and you start asking whether this is a judge or it is someone from a bush. So we have those cases that were filed, including the other community of 7,000 people. And right now, some of those people are still living in camps, in like a camp, a refugee. You find their culture, their customs have been completely distorted. Many people are landless because of the problems of compensation. So after seeing that we would not get justice in Ugandan courts, we said, since there is a law in France that allows organizations or anyone to take action against a company that is doing wrong things in a country like Uganda, let's go and file a case in France. And that's the reason why we filed it in France against Total. We believe that, the courts in France, with somehow a developed democracy, we can get justice.
Okay. How do you retain faith in the law as a way to provide justice to people?
It's extremely difficult that you are going to court. Sometimes these courts that you see the judges are already compromised. Some of them have been appointed by the government without following the procedure and because they want certain people there. But at the end of the day, what can you do? So we normally go to those institutions, not because we trust them, but it is part of the bigger efforts that we are trying to deploy. When we go to court, we don't only stop there. That's the reason why we actually have been working with many international organizations. We've been working with international media that we can actually expose. If it is a bad judgment that we get, which we think is contrary to the evidence, we want to expose the judge, we want to expose the court. And so our efforts is to reform the court system. But also when we go to court, we don't stop there. We continue working with communities. That some of the communities where, for example, members of parliament come from, we actually try to make communities understand that the parliament has a role in approving the judges that are appointed by the president. So we tell them, if these courts are not determining your cases, it is because your MPs are not doing the right job. Some MPs have lost votes, have failed to go back to parliament. So we use different approaches to ensure that we create the pressure on different groups. When we work with international organizations, international media, we say even if the cases are not heard, we can have pressure against the companies themselves. So even if the case was not to be concluded in France, Total is facing a lot of pressure. Sinok is facing a lot of pressure because within the communities, they are facing pressure. At international community level, they are facing pressure. So we are not relying on only courts. We are not relying on any one approach. We are using different approaches to be able to achieve something. It is about governance. It is about democracy. Because we've been seeing that, even before oil, our wetlands, our forests, our game parks have been being degraded by different projects. And we discovered it is the government institutions that are supposed to ensure that those resources are conserved. The government institutions that are supposed to protect government revenues that would provide services to those communities that are suffering, they are the ones actually plundering those resources and wasting those resources. So while we are looking at oil is a symptom because we are looking at the governance system that you can have institutions which are responsible for conservation, they can do their work. You can look at the courts which are supposed to ensure that people get justice when they have problems, they do their work. You are looking at parliament supposed to make laws for the governance of social, economic, environmental aspects, that it is doing its work. When that governance is not there, it becomes very difficult for you to expect anything. And we believe that, strengthening communities, that every citizen in a country is able to understand his or her rights, to understand that actually to achieve something, you must work for it. And they know what it takes to stand and to resist injustice. We believe that that's how we can be able to contribute to improved governance. So that's what we are doing. We are looking at different things, but the bigger question is governance.
How did it feel to receive the Right Livelihood Award?
When you come here and you find there are international groups and they are recognizing your efforts, and they are saying what you are doing is actually critical for humanity, that feeling actually makes you so happy. It motivates you. It inspires you to know that actually there are people out there who appreciate your work. And we feel very much appreciated because our staff, as I said, some personally and 6 of my staff have been with a police bond on our neck since October last year. Up to now, we don't know whether the next day you are going to go back to the cells. We've been demanding that we be taken to court to be able to present evidence that actually we have not committed anything, but they will not take you. I'm a lawyer. Sometimes I do legal practice, but you see the government's objective, they know you have not committed an offense, but they want to keep you under pressure that you can't, you know, somehow you feel like you are guilty. The communities, they want to make the communities feel that actually you are not the right organization, you are not the right individuals. So when we get recognized at this level, we feel that what we are doing is noble, and is useful to the world, is useful to our citizens, and you get the energy to wake up the next day and be able to continue doing your work.
What lessons do you feel activists in other countries or the global climate movement should take from AFIEGO?
We need to make sure the citizens in our countries understand what climate change is about. Any global movement that is going to mobilize, to create pressure for the world leaders, for national leaders and the world leaders to take action, must come from the communities. Because I think in my experience is that every individual is selfish. You can go to France and come up with the climate change agreement. You can generate all the evidence to show that exploiting, for example, fossil fuels is actually the biggest danger to climate change. But I think to take the initiative and ensure that what is supposed to be done is done.
Can you share with us a moment that you think of as a particular victory and how that felt for you?
When we stopped the first refinery of 2008 from being built in a game reserve, somehow we felt that it was a great achievement because at least we saw both the government and the company that were trying to build, they accepted that actually it was a bad decision. So that one stopped. Then in 2012, when that community of 7,000 people was being displaced, at first the government and the companies had said it was not their responsibility to ensure that both husbands and the wives get compensation and sign the compensation forms. So when we created pressure, the UN human rights, Uganda human rights, we petitioned them, we petitioned the court that, these family properties must be protected by both the husband and the wife. And we saw the government changing the compensation process and ensuring all the wives actually signed on the compensation. Somehow many families protected their properties. Many ladies were able to ensure that the compensation money is used. So those are some of the things that I saw with my eyes that, when you do you employ efforts, you do your work, it is possible to save some of the communities to ensure that injustices are reduced.
What is the next fight for you?
Of course, as I said, we still believe that there should be no oil exploitation in Uganda and no exploitation in the world. But we are fighting against elephants. If you are a small rabbit and you are trying to chase one elephant, you know what it means. These are huge companies with very repressive governments. You are talking about the projects in Uganda, the oil projects. They say they need around $20 billion to develop those projects. They say they are going to be earning around 3 or 4 billion US dollars every year from oil. So any challenge, any question about those projects, we know it is going to be extremely hard and it is going to remain very difficult. But we are committed to say we are not going to allow our communities, our critical ecosystems, those parks that I talked about, forests, wetlands, lakes and rivers, we believe that it is our responsibility as citizens, as Ugandans, and as part of global community, that we protect those ecosystems, we protect those communities. So whether it is 5 years or 10 years or 100 years, we believe it is going to be our preoccupation to ensure that we guard against the dangers that are caused by oil. We protect our communities, we protect our ecosystems.
When you're fighting such massive institutions and, as you mentioned, the argument that they make that this is the only way to bring economic prosperity and development to Uganda is, can involve so much money, can be so powerful and persuasive. What's the alternative vision that you present for what a future prosperous Uganda would look like?
Right now, AFIEGO is actually a coordinator of a network called the Inclusive Green Economy Network, East Africa, which has the organizations and private companies from Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and we want to bring all the other members from the East African countries, which are currently 7. And we are saying that, there's no reason whatsoever why we need to confine our brains to oil. There are many other better alternatives. And in that network, we are trying to promote tourism as a development option, that you can conserve our critical biodiversity and ensure that if you are talking about revenues, you get revenues. If you are talking about jobs, you get jobs. So we also focusing on forestry. We are saying if you protect your forestry, you can actually generate all the social, economic, environmental opportunities that you need. We are also promoting clean energy. Under the IGEN, the Inclusive Green Economy Network, we are saying you government, your role is to put the best policies in place, ensure that the solar equipment the counterfeit equipments are not allowed in the country, so that people have trust and confidence in that system. And so within a short time that we can actually have every Ugandan having access to clean energy. And we are saying, no, you don't need, because the investments in the grid is massive. Most of the taxes are invested in the grid, but the grid is not accessible by the people because the electricity that is generated from our dams and transmitted through the one grid, that electricity is too expensive that today, for people who know about Uganda, we are supposed to pay 50 million US dollars for power that is not consumed. And the reason is that the power purchase agreements that are signed between companies that are building those dams and managing the distribution network, and those power purchase agreements between companies and the government, they provide that once a company has built a dam, and it is commissioned, whether the power is consumed or not consumed, government must pay for it. And right now we are paying 50 million US dollars in this financial year. So we are saying if you shifted that $50 million and decided to give each household a solar panel, within 2, 3, 4 years, you can have each household in Uganda having a solar panel. So we are trying to promote that to ensure that we can have an alternative to get clean energy. So we are also promoting agriculture and fisheries to ensure that, don't look at oil as if it is the only option for us to survive. You can have all these other better alternatives. And for you to succeed with agriculture, you must make sure that our nature is conserved, our nature is protected. And it is very possible, because if you look at Uganda, we have fertile soils, we have 2 seasons of rain, you don't need irrigation, you don't need fertilizer, you can, but if you are going to engage in activities that are going to destroy our climate, then you are actually destroying humanity. So those are some of the alternatives that we are trying to push, and they are helping us, because previously companies and the government were saying, no, you are saying don't engage in gas, don't engage in oil. What do you want us to do? We are now presenting clear evidence that actually you can do much better if you engage in those green economy activities than if you were spending all the billions into oil. So we believe that, if we continue, and of course, I must appreciate that, again, we are relying on expertise of many international organizations that are helping us to build those scenarios that these other alternatives to fossils can work much better, can work for the poorest people, can work for women, can work for the youth. So we are doing, I think, a lot of work to ensure that those alternatives also are seen and appreciated by each and every person out there.
Thinking about the next year, say, what's the most positive but realistic? So, what's the best case scenario that you would wish for?
I think the best thing that we've even discussed at our organization level is to ensure that we especially for IGEN, the IGEN network, the one I've talked about, the Inclusive Green Economy Network, that we have members from all the East African countries, and we are able to visit all the East African countries as a group, and we are able to have a manifesto of what needs to be done for these alternative green economy projects that should be done, and be able to show that actually all these projects, green economy projects, present better social, economic, environmental alternatives for our people compared to if we are looking at investing all our resources in oil. So if that one is done, that we have a manifesto that clearly a blueprint of what needs to be done as an alternative, we believe that as AFIEGO will have done a good job, and we can be able to mobilize people in Uganda and beyond to look at how we can use that blueprint to push forward.
Thank you.